Hello, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Hello, Milagros. Welcome to the Werk podcast. We are so honored to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori, Brittany. I'm so honored that you guys have called me and asked me to have a conversation with you.
And I can't help but see that your name means miracle in Spanish, and I feel like we need a miracle for this work to be actualized by the collective. So I don't doubt that your name has significance beyond just, your mother and your father giving you that name.
Yeah, my mother actually was a stillbirth, and my mother gave me that name because her promise was that if I lived, I would be an offering.
Oh,
And
Wow.
that was her prayer. And so she named me Milagros Altagracia, which means miracle of the highest grace. Yeah.
Oh
And
my gosh, it's
there are times
beautiful.
that I go, like, nobody asked me if I wanted to do this. Hello. This woman just kind of offered me up for whatever, right? And I end up doing race work. I'm an artist. I want to go paint. You know what I mean? Like, I want to go sing. I'm a singer, and I'm doing race work. What in the world? Anyway, long answer to your short question. So
no, I really believe it's true because even when I listen to you speak about this topic, there's such, and maybe you don't feel this way, but when I hear your voice, there's this resonance of grace and patience behind it, and I can't imagine it to be anything but frustrating. So,
I used to think so too, but there came a point where grace really did take over race, and that can happen for anyone who is conscious enough to realize that we're bigger than the problem, but it's not about ignoring the problem. It's
exactly.
about going through it and facing it and acknowledging it.
Exactly. Well, just out of pure curiosity about your story, what came first, your spiritual work or the race work?
Um, well, I got my calling when I was 13 years old, the day that Dr. King died. I locked myself
Oh,
in the bathroom to cry. And while I was in there, I heard a voice that I was to continue the work. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew I wasn't going to do it. That much I didn't know. There was no way in the world. Somebody just killed that man for doing. Are you serious? No, I'm 13. Like, no. And so I resisted it for most of my life. But as life goes, stuff happens in your life, and it just feels like, oh my God, I'm doing all the right things. Why is my life not working? Right. And so I started doing a lot of personal growth work, and I started awakening. And at some point I became healthy enough to realize that I needed healing. It's like
Wow.
I peeled away enough layers through the personal growth work that I realized, wow, I need healing.
mhm.
you
Mm.
know and so then that became the journey was for me to understand how to heal myself, how to be whole, right? Like, I didn't even have that language then, but that's really what I was looking at. It's like, how do I be whole? um and and so that became the journey, and eventually it brought me back to race. So I'm
Wow.
so grateful, because a lot of people who come to my seminars and my programs, um they're like, they want to train with me, and I do have a trainer program that I did for a corporation, so it isn't anything like that, but I know what they're saying when they say they want to train with me. And and they're sort of, because I do a lot of the historical and generational stuff, because that's part of the healing process. So they want that piece, and I'm like, that's nothing, you can get that on the internet, you know what I mean?
Mm.
The real work is the other piece. It's the spiritual piece. It's the sacred connection. It's the peeling away enough layers so you can find yourself beyond the conditioning. It's owning that power that's in there that you can't even see anymore, because you've given it away to the world, the politicians, the educate, blah blah blah. And so we lose that essence. And so for me, it was like coming home to that essence. And then I started to do race work.
Mm.
you know. So I didn't, it's not like I went to school to learn this stuff. It's none of that, right? But I was brought through becoming a Reiki Master and Teacher, um, becoming a Kriya Yoga initiate,
Mm.
teaching manifestation, teaching, and this was in the 90s, okay? Teaching um, A Course in Miracles, um, teaching sound therapy, which I was completely what we call in the world self-taught. But I literally would wake up in the middle of the night. I just had a dream that I was sitting in a classroom learning about frequencies. And it, you know, so it's been an embracing of all these things. And then going back and realizing, oh my God, I was 5 when I first learned about frequencies, because my brother would put on a record and it would be full orchestration of a classical piece. And he would say to me, do you hear that violin?
Mm.
And, you know, I'm just this little kid, right? Like I'm trying to hear what he's hearing. And then he would sing it for me. And do you hear the viola? And do you hear the piano? And what I learned was, when you focus on a frequency, all the other frequencies disappear. And now you're with that frequency and that frequency alone. So I learned that at 5. Okay. How does that translate to now? What I teach people in my seminars is how to find racism in your body. Where is it in your body? And then what do you need to do to change the frequency so that that energy that's blocked, because most people feel it as a block, starts to move and dissipate. So I learned all of these things that people would think are completely disconnected from race and racism, in order to be able to do that work from a place of compassion and peace, to be able to understand that this is not anybody's fault who's living today, but that for generation after generation, we've been conditioned into this racial caste system
Mm.
that keeps us separate from one another. And that separation keeps us from seeing who we really are. So, and it's one of the reasons I do this work. I mean, my calling is healing racism, but my passion is transformation. And so I was brought in through the doors of transformation to do the work of racism.
Mm.
I'm in awe of everything that you said, and as you were speaking and talking about the different mediums and modalities you use to do the race work and to help guide people through transformation, I was literally hearing that song, Favorite Things. These are a few of my
I love
favorite
that song. That's
things.
one of my favorite songs.
But it's true, all of these things can help us weave together what's sort of been severed. And we touched on this before we started recording, which is the 3D, this physical reality that we live in. And that's sort of like, at least from my perspective, where we feel most of the layers of white supremacy. But it's deeply connected to what we can't see and what we know to be real in our souls, right? And that's obviously connected to the 5D, which we hear a lot about more so now, at least in my world. And so I wonder if you're able to touch on that transition from 3D to 5D and what that really means, and how that is intertwined with racism, and even the desire to ignore racism and shadow.
Yeah, shadow, biggie. Uh, yeah, um, so I joke a lot about this because, of course, you know, the community that I just sort of embraced and grew up in. By community, I mean like my friends and all. We were this amazingly powerful and wonderful spiritual community. We've all met in the 90s. We knew that we were a spiritual family, and we had a consciousness around the fact that we're here to do something. And so everybody was trying different things, right? And so it was a great time for us because we got to explore all these various modalities and touch and tap and all these things. And it was just incredible. And it was probably in the mid to late 90s when people started talking about how we are now going to the fifth dimension. And I used to get so frustrated because I'm like, you haven't even learned how to handle the third dimension. Where do you think you're going? Like, it's not going to happen, because, there are things that are happening in the world. And so much of our community, when I say our community, I'm talking about the spiritually conscious community. It's a very loving community. It really is. There's no question about that. But we're not here to be loving while ignoring the pain. We are here to be bigger than the pain so we can move through it. And the fact that the spiritual community chooses to ignore racism completely, okay, and that they don't want to talk about it, or they think they're too spiritual to be racist, is because they don't understand racism. And ignorance doesn't move the bubble.
Yeah.
It doesn't move it. It's so funny. I laugh because when I was working this book that I just finished writing, the longest chapters, I had one long chapter in my book, and my editor said, you need to split that into 2 chapters. And there's still the 2 longest chapters in my book are on denial. because we do it so well. We're so good at denying the shadow. Yeah. We're so good at denying the pain. We'll say things to people like, well, don't say that. Don't put that out into the world. You know what? Or think positive. That's my favorite. What I've learned from my work is that traumatized people can only hold the think positive for that long, because the trauma starts to move back in. So it's a practice, and it isn't just like it's today's trauma or your early childhood trauma. It's intergenerational historical trauma, which we now know gets passed on through epigenetics. And so people are carrying stuff that doesn't even belong to them, and they don't even know where it came from. So when it comes to race and racism, regardless of where we are in the caste system, which, by the way, by the time children are 3 years old, they already know where they belong in the caste system, who are the good people according to what they've learned, right? Quote unquote, right? Who are the good people, who are the bad people, who are the ugly people, who are the pretty people. And if you have never seen the doll test, you need to watch that. But so by the time we're very young, we've already been conditioned into a dysfunctional system, which, and we're very good at normalizing the dysfunction. And so part of the blind spot in the spiritual community is that they believe that if they just do this, they don't have to do that. So there's a lot of bargaining that happens in our spiritual community. And trust me, I love my spiritual community. All, my grounded, loving, amazing friends are all part of that, because that's, my children grew up in that community. In fact, it's really hilarious because my daughter tells me, she'll go like on YouTube or something, and she'll see a bunch of people in white clothing holding hands, going around in a circle. She goes, oh my God, it looks like my mother's backyard. So my poor baby's been traumatized, It's like, oh my God, but, and we're all still friends, and everybody in that community has written books about, different, like my friend Shelley wrote about seashells and our connection to the seashell kingdom. And my friend Steve is a shaman. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, that's who we are, right? And so when I say this, it comes out of a place of love. It's not a judgment on the spiritual community, but it's an awareness and a discernment that there is a huge missing piece.
Yes.
That the spiritual community needs to work on, and that it's an incredible opportunity, because we are here, like, we've been sent as a body of remembrance. And when I say remembrance, I'm talking about remembering, bringing back the members of the human family to acknowledge our oneness as a human family, and how a lot of what's happened, and there's historical, I did put a bunch of information in my latest book, historical information, so people can understand how this stuff happened, when it happened, where it happened, why it happened, and how it's still affecting us today. Because people don't realize that we are under international law that were set up in the 1400s, and we are, if you live in a country that's been colonized at any point in time, you're living under these laws.
Mhm.
And if those laws don't get rescinded, we're always going to live under those laws. Now, I'm going to talk about that from two different perspectives. There's the physical perspective of, the 3D perspective of these laws that affect human beings. These laws affect the waterways, the land, physical human bodies. And these are laws that Supreme Court just used them in 2005. The Australians used it recently. The Canadians used it like 2015. You know what I mean? So these laws are there, right?
Mhm.
So there's that part of it. But then there's the spiritual piece around that. John Bradshaw wrote a wonderful book years ago. It's called Family Secrets. Now, I want you to think about us as a human family, right? So family secrets. And I always tell people that all the functions and dysfunctions of the biological family apply to us as a human family. The biggest was the macro and the micro, right? And so he wrote this wonderful book called Family Secrets. And in Family Secrets, he talks about how when there's a secret in the family, and by secret, he's not just referring to the things that people purposely keep as a secret, but how there are things in families that people just don't talk about. Just don't talk about it. They're part of your family history, but they don't talk about it. But regardless, they still act out of the dysfunction.
Mhm.
They still act out of the family secret, even when they don't know what the secret is, because there are certain behaviors that are akin to that secret, right? Like, that you never mention Auntie Sue, you
Mhm.
know, but you don't know why.
Mhm.
All you know is when you mention Auntie Sue, mommy goes off, or something, you know what I mean? Like something happens. And then one day you find out that Auntie Sue committed suicide, right?
Yes.
And what does that do for you? It fills in the blanks. It helps you to be more compassionate toward your mother, who you thought just acted crazy because she just heard a name. You know what I'm saying? Or, like it helps you to understand the behaviors when you understand the history, right? And I learned that as a young mom, like I remember I had gone back. I was living in the Pacific Northwest and had gone back to New York to visit family. And my sister, who was older, she was like 30 years older than myself. That's why it was called Miracle, because nobody was expecting me to show up. But my sister and I were having a conversation. We're talking about my grandmother. And my sister said something to me in that moment that brought me back to being 7 years old, coming home from school. This was in the Dominican Republic. And there was a woman in our backyard, and there's a big square tub full of bubbles. She was washing our clothes. Okay. Because I went in the backyard and I'm like, oh, what are you doing? I'm 7 years old. Like I see a tub full of bubbles. It's like heaven. Okay. And so to this day, I still love bubbles. So here I am in my backyard and all these bubbles. And I said to her, what are you doing? She goes, I'm washing your uniform. And because we had a white uniform. Okay. Like who gives a white uniform to, like, but anyway, it was a white uniform. So she's washing this thing and there are all these bubbles. And I'm like, oh my God. So I put my hands in. I said, can I help you? Show me how to wash clothes. My mother's in the kitchen. This was happening in our backyard. My mother heard that. My mother comes out and she yanks me, by the wrist and takes me away. and gets very angry with this woman and says to her, I'm not paying you to teach my daughter to wash clothes, blah, 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 blah. And she was so mean to this lady. And I had never seen my mother be mean to anybody. And I was so angry with her because she was being mean to the lady and she spoiled my fun because now I couldn't play with the freaking bubbles. Okay.
Mhm.
And so I was just like done with her. I was so mad at her. So, you know, and it's so interesting because I obviously, you know, I'm a kid. I forgot all about that. So now I'm at my sister's and, you know, obviously my grandmother's been dead had been dead for a couple of decades at that point. My sister tells me this story about my grandmother. She said, my grandmother was a domestic in somebody's house and she was raped and she got pregnant. And my mother had determined that none of her girls would ever be a domestic. And in the Dominican Republic, if you have skin like mine, the expectation is that you will at some point be a domestic at that point in time. Okay. And so my mother was trying to save me, trying to save my sister, and trying to save her own mother. Because what I put together in that moment was my mother saw the woman with the wash tub as a threat to the goals that she had for her daughter's life, which was making sure I was well educated, making blah, 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 right? So that I wouldn't end up as a domestic, because in her mind, a domestic puts you in a position where you could get raped. That makes sense? So in that moment, that little bit of history helped me to understand all my mother's behavior and how, you know, getting good grades was so important and blah, 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 all of this stuff that was really, really important to her came to light because I understood the history. When it comes to race and racism, we don't get enough of the history. I call it not getting enough information to make the transformation. And without that information, it's very difficult for us to make the transformation. But those of us who are awake need to start doing that work because it is one of the reasons that we are here. That this is why this is such a global issue. This isn't just a US, it's a global issue. And we are here as global citizens. We cannot ignore this and think that we are doing the spiritual work that we're supposed to be doing. It, you know, at the end of my book, I talk about what do you need to know to heal? And the first thing is history. And you also need to understand and to be trauma informed. Those are the two main things. And there are other things on the list, but you know, we can't continue as a spiritual community. One of the reasons I wanted the spiritual community to do this work is because we have so much awakened energy that we could really make a dent in this thing. And we know how to work with energy. So we could seriously make a dent in this thing. But you can't make a dent in something that you don't understand and that you don't know. You don't know.
Or that you don't want to know.
Bingo. Bingo. Yeah. It's huge. And, you know, it's such an opening, and it is such an opportunity for amazing growth. And for me, it's if you're serious about this fifth dimension work, you got to do this work first, because this work connects you to all the human beings on the planet. And right now we are not connected. I mean, you go to spiritual events, you got to figure I'm doing this in the 90s, right? I'm the only one. Like, you know,
Been there.
Yeah. Occasionally you would have some East Indian women who would come to some of these events, you know. Occasionally you would have an Asian woman. And when I say an Asian woman, but it was rare. It was rare. And for me, it's like, how could you think you're doing the work when you're leaving out 80% of the world's population? 80% of the world's population are people of color.
Yes.
The global majority.
Yeah, we are the global majority. And you're leaving these people out and you think you're going to the fifth dimension, like, hello, like,
Mhm.
wake up, you know. And so, it's this whole thing of, and then it becomes this ego thing, and it's like, who cares if you go to the fifth or the fourth? Like, I don't care. I really seriously want you to do the work
Yeah.
so you could really get there, And so anyway, yeah.
Hearing you speak is making me cry and laugh, and I'm just going through this roller coaster of emotions. Thank you for sharing that story with us. It was truly, truly, I feel like I have to let it integrate in me a little longer after this conversation is over. But one of the things that you speak a lot about is race literacy. And I watched your TED talk on that specific topic and why history is so important, and how also we haven't been taught that history, especially in America. And you spoke about family secrets, and I feel like Black and Indigenous history is our family secret that they don't want us to know. Let's just call it what it is, white body people
Mhm.
of the dominant group, right? Do you believe that they don't want to know and they don't want us to learn about the history because in a conscious and subconscious level, they know they will have to relinquish their power because it's a power thing as well?
Well, see, I don't even look at it as relinquishing power, because when people are awake, they don't give their power away. So all these people that we have traditionally given our power to, politicians and this one and that, when you start giving them your power because you realize that your power is yours, it changes the dynamics of our existence.
Mhm.
So it isn't even that. There is, the Course in Miracles puts it really well. It says, and I'm going to probably really botch this, but it's about how um how none of us is special,
Mhm.
right? None of us is special, and all of us are special,
Mhm.
right? None of us is special, and all of us are unique.
Mhm.
None of us is special, and it's so. Here's the thing about that. When, and I raised a family, and there are times that your kids just want to get your attention, right? And so, let's say somebody's just like, the one that always gets the straight A's, or the one that's great in sports, or the one that blah, 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 right? Like whatever it is that makes us special in the fact, because again, going back, we're looking at it as a global family, right? And so we go from the 3-year-old that pulls on her mommy's skirt going, mommy, 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 look, 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 right? To being then the teenager that's trying to get attention with their friends, and everything's a popularity contest and blah, 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 right? And then we grow up to be adults and we keep repeating the same pattern. It's like, well, you're not 3 anymore, but here's what happens. Because of the way that the history has been told, what we've told approximately 20% of the population is that they're better than the other 80%, and they've believed it. And who wouldn't? Like, if your mommy's favorite, you'll like that role, because maybe you're going to get a little more spaghetti or something, you know what I mean? And so how we do that, how we maintain that, is through what is called privilege, which has nothing to do, white privilege is not about wealth. Okay, just to be clear, for those of you who are not clear, it is not about wealth. It's about the privileges that are allotted to you because you have white skin.
Mhm.
That's what it is. So you could be a poor white person and you still have white privilege. You may not have money privilege, okay, but you have white privilege. And in a pinch, you will be treated better than the Black person that's standing next to you. Okay. That's just the reality. Okay. So when looking at it from that perspective, when we get to be special, we don't like to not be special anymore. Okay. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? And so there's that part of it. The thing about specialness is it makes us believe that we have the answer to everything and everyone and for everyone. And it makes us believe that what is good for us is also good for them.
Mhm.
And how we play that role in the world, one nation to another or one group to another, is that we do this thing of, we bring what has worked for us and we impose it on other people. So I'll give you an example. I have a chapter in my book called Latitude and Attitude. Okay. So global latitude and our personal attitude.
Mhm.
And the reason I wrote that chapter is because if you stop to think about the way the world is set up, right? You have people who live in cold climates, and people who live in cold climates develop differently than people who live in warm climates, right? So for instance, people in cold climate have to be really good at preserving food because they have 3 months to grow their food, and whatever they harvest has to last them till the next harvest season, right? And so you've got 3 months to grow your food. There are some things that are going to be really important to you, like time, right? You don't want to miss the growing season. Preservation, because you want to be able to preserve that food so it lasts until you can grow some more. You got to have a special kind of shelter to protect the grain so you can survive, right? Like those kinds of things, right? So now you have these cold climate people going to warm climate people and telling them how to behave. But here's the problem. When you try to preserve food in hot climate, it's going to go bad, right? So that preservation at that level doesn't work there. That's why now we have refrigeration. But in the olden days, that wasn't going to work, right? Time, who cares? Who cares about time? You know, when you have, if the papaya is not growing, the mango's growing. The mango's not growing, the avocado. There's always something in season. So there's plenty of food. So when you look out into your world, there are flowers growing. There are leaves on the trees. It's beautiful out. It's sunny. It's gorgeous. And there's plenty to eat. Who cares about time? You go to sleep when it gets dark. You wake up when it's light out, right?
Mhm.
But if you live in a cold climate, your perception of the world, when you look out 9 months out of the year, there isn't even a leaf on the tree. So the way you view the world is one of scarcity.
Mhm.
There's just not enough. There's not enough food to last us till the next growing season. There's just not enough. Now, if you take that, it's called axiology. And if you want to learn more, you could look at Dr. Edwin Nichols' work. But if you take those axial patterns and then you spread them like butter all over the world and you put them in places that it doesn't belong, what happens is it causes cognitive dissonance for people. Both the ones that are interposing it and the ones that is interposed upon. Because what you have known from your ancestry, if you're in a warm climate, is that you don't do those things. You don't do those things that those people in cold climate do. And when you look out into the world, you just see abundance.
Mhm.
Okay. When those people look out, they see scarcity. So here's the thing. When you spread that consciousness all over the world, you create a world where people themselves believe that they're not enough.
Mhm.
You're not enough. You're not white enough, black enough, short enough, tall enough, skinny enough. You're just not enough. Smart enough. You know, and from that perception, we create a world that then begins to look at their spiritual journey as not enough. Okay. And so they start to do all these things that they now have to find their abundance, right? Don't we have like a lot of seminars and things on finding your abundance,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
We spend a lot of time there. And it has to do, see, and this is what, when you start to understand race and racism and the ways that we've been segregated and separated, you start to understand all this other stuff that we end up doing all these workshops for, because we don't understand that that's not a reality, you know, for Black and brown people who live in worlds where there's plenty of food, until we stole the food and the natural resources from them. And then we told them that they were poor, which they
Haiti.
are.
Whoa.
Do you understand that?
Yes.
You got it.
Wow.
That just dropped in for you. I felt that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So let me give you an example of that. Haiti.
Oh, I
And
just
right
had
now we're seeing what's happening at the border. Don't even get me started with that. But Haiti was the first country in the Caribbean to set itself free from the enslavement of the French, 1804. So they fought off the French, and they got them off the island. They put them on ships to go away, and then they killed off the French that were left on the island because they were afraid they were going to enslave them again. Okay. So now you got these ships sitting out there waiting to come back and take over that island again. You guys are so cute. You both drank at the same time. So they, eventually, the Haitians managed to fight him off enough to get him to go back to France. 21 years later, they come back, and the threat to enslave the island again was so great that they came to an agreement. And the agreement was that in order to maintain their freedom, the Haitians would have to pay reparations to France. The payment of reparations to France from the Haitian people was supposed to stop in 1945. Now, think about that. That's 120 years. Okay? But it didn't. And during the earthquake of 2010, the world finds out that the quote unquote poorest country in the world has been paying reparations to France for almost 200 years. Now, think about that. When you're so poor, you can't even pay attention, okay? Let alone pay reparations. So we're talking about a wealthy country whose wealth has been siphoned out of there and gone to Europe. Now, that is not the only country that has had to pay reparations. During the Second World War, the English had the Indians paying reparations for the Second World War. It wasn't their fault. Why should they have to pay reparations? But they did. And that's because everybody's under this international law. So, when we are not awake and alive and spiritually thriving, what we think is that the majority of the world are white-bodied people, because that's the way it's been painted. But the reality is that is not the truth. The majority of the world are Black, brown, Asian people, people of color. That's the majority of the world. And the majority of the wealth is held in those countries that have been colonized. Because you don't colonize someplace that you ain't gonna get nothing out of. Okay? It's like, why bother, right? Colonization, it takes a lot of energy. And so what happens is that we end up colonizing people's minds and hearts. And the spiritual community has a responsibility to wake up, because we are here to do this work. This is the work of remembering the human family, the acknowledging the fact that we are all related, that if we learn how to work with the resources that we have in this incredibly wealthy world, everybody can be fed, everybody can be housed, everybody can be well educated, because we're losing so much natural resource with this nonsense, this craziness that only these people are smart and only these people are rich and only come on, everybody that came on this planet came in with gifts, and we're missing them because of this stuff. And as a spiritual community, we have a responsibility. We were awakened first. all this stuff that's happening right now, most of us already knew it was coming. We knew it was coming because it was foretold and it was written in books. And, you know, if you get the right books, like in detail, okay? In detail. And so, you know, so it isn't like we didn't have the information, but we cannot continue to ignore the need to open our hearts to the entire world. The sun doesn't go, oh, I'll shine on this group and not that group. Oh, on this country, but not that country. It doesn't work like that. You know, love, real love, genuine love, the love that pours through you is unstoppable. It's not about, oh, I'm only going to love this one and not that one. It works like the sun. That's why we have it as an example. It shines on everyone and on everything. That's our responsibility. But we can't do that if we sold our souls to segregation.
Oh.
So take a nice deep breath. That's what I tell people in my class. I do a two-day seminar that helps people to really get it. And it takes 45 days for people to move through the information that's in that seminar. 45 days. It's a 2-day seminar, but it takes 45 days. So Laura, when you said, I need to absorb this when we get off the call, I would suggest to everyone, 1, drink a lot of water. 2, let yourself, rather than judging what you're hearing, just sit in silence with it and ask your soul if it's truth, because your body probably already told you that it's truth.
Yes.
You know, but sometimes we need to just kind of sit like, you know, like, oh, I need to muscle test that a couple more times to make sure, you know, but you know, and that's okay. That's okay. Because a lot of this stuff we are not being told. And, you know, we live in a patriarchy, and a patriarchy infantilizes people because it needs infants to control. If you are not an infant, you can no longer think about a 3-year-old. Like, by the time you're 3, like, you're running all over the place. It's hard to control you. Okay. So can you imagine when you're functioning from the truth of your power? Can't nobody control you. And so, you know, so it's this awakening to the truth of that power, because if we're not willing to do the work of the shadow's got us in its grip. When we realize that we are bigger than the shadow, then we have it, and we can decide what to do with it rather than having it decide what it does with us. And as spiritual beings having a human experience, all of it is part of the human experience. All of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. All of it. It's, are we willing to love through it? Are we willing to shine that great and glorious energy on everyone, regardless of their behavior? And some of that behavior is real ugly. I'm somebody's parent, and it's like, I would never allow that in my house. But anyway, you know, it's that realization that we have been infantilized, and we need to grow up. You know, we have a responsibility to grow up while we're still in the flesh, while we're still here, and then start making a difference at that deeper place where we have so much untapped power that we're just learning, right? But part of that has to do with that sacred connection, because can you imagine what we could do with the conscious awareness that we are one human body, one human family, when we are all connected at that sacred level? I mean, what we can do on this planet is so beautiful and so extraordinary. But if we think we're better than another group, or we, you know, everybody's been traumatized. Everybody. Most of the people that came to this country have come because there was trauma behind back there where they were, including the Pilgrims and the people who came over on the Mayflower. I mean, you know, Europe was no picnic back then. Disease was rampant. You know, there was malnutrition because remember they only had 3 months to grow their food. You know, there was the nobility, and then there was the poor people, the indentured servants, and the white enslaved people who were the first slaves to come to America. People don't even know that the first enslaved people in this continent were white people.
Yeah.
But you know, we don't, again, it's the way we tell the history and the history that we choose to tell. And what it does is it, you know, I always tell people those who are misinformed are bound to miscreate. Because people create from the information that they have. And if they don't have information, the mind fills in the blank with the information that they have. And if that's misinformation, then that's what they fill it with. So it's, you know, but the hope is in us, in all of us, becoming conscious and going, wow, you know, I need to do this work. This is part of the awakening. That's why we keep seeing it over. Like, how many times do you have to see stuff? Like now we have television, right? Like people have been talking about this stuff for centuries, but now you're seeing it with your own eyes and people are still in denial. I'm telling you, 2 huge chapters on denial. It's like I just need for you to understand what denial is and how it works. And how, when you liberate yourself from denial, you break into this whole nother realm of awareness, you know?
Milagros, why do you think we're in such denial, the collective we? Do you think it's like more comfortable? Do you think it's like it makes us feel safe? I mean, it sort of, it goes also to the way you discussed, I was listening to an interview that you did not that long ago, last year, and you talked about how white people are oppressed, like, and they're in denial about their oppression, and because of that, we continue to perpetuate these cycles. Why do you think that
That's a great question. So here's the thing. Human beings are wired for connection. They're wired for love, and they're wired for bliss, and they're wired for spirituality. We know this now through research, right? Because we like research. We like to count and measure everything. So, so what we know, right, is that so the human heart is wired for love. These situations are not loving. They're just not, right? So in order for us to survive in difficult situations, we go into denial. People do it all the time. People in abusive situations, which this is an abusive situation, and it's abusive to everybody involved, because it's so obvious how it's abusive to people of color. But it's also abusive to white people. They just don't see how it's abusive because they think they're on the other side. But they don't realize that all of this trauma, they're passing it on to their children and their children's children and their children's children's children, okay? Because trauma gets passed on from one generation to another. So, and you can't traumatize other people without yourself being compromised, because now you're in the trauma. And so therefore you're also gonna, you know what I mean? So it's this cycle, right? But human beings are naturally wired for love and connection. And in order for us to stay in systems that are counter our human nature, we go into denial, because it allows us to live counter our true nature, which is love and connection. Okay. And so what happens in the white community is that a lot of that is, but I'm a good person and I'm a nice person and I'm not a racist. And I, you know, and again, it's the lack of understanding of what racism is. Racism is a condition brought about through hundreds of years of conditioning. This is not any white person's fault, but it is still our collective responsibility to heal it. But you can't heal what you don't understand, right? And so part of it is understanding what it is that we're dealing with. So when it comes to the sacredness of this connection, of our natural human connection to one another, when we can't do that, we go into denial. Oh, it's got to be because, right? And there's always a reason and an excuse. Oh, those people over there, they're bad. Oh, those people over there, so I'm not connected. That's why I'm not connected to them. So we keep making all of these excuses and reasons why we're not connecting, because if we ever face the truth, we'd have to face the fact that it hurts. It's painful to just pull ourselves from the family, and keep picking and pulling at pieces. That's painful to do. And so human beings go into denial. It's a natural state that people go into, but you have to wake up from the denial in order to be able to do the healing work. You have to at least be aware of the fact that you're in denial. You got to be conscious about your denial, which at that point you're choosing denial, which is different from choosing ignorance and all of that. But, it's just that people are wired for love. There's a wonderful line in one of Carolyn Mace's old books is Anatomy of the Spirit, in which she says, if your heart and your head are in two different places, you will be an addict. You'll be addicted to some person, some place, something. I think it was 1998 or 99. Someone wrote a paper for the the AMA, American Medical Association, on how racism follows the same pathology as alcoholism and drug abuse.
Oh my
Follows
gosh.
the same exact pathology. And when you start to break down those, people hang out together. People, there's certain things and behaviors that people have who are addicted, and in how communities are addicted to certain things. And when you normalize the dysfunction, you don't addicts don't know, like when they're like, there's nothing wrong with me. You ask them, you tell an alcoholic, I think you have a drinking problem. They're like, no, I don't. I only drink 30 times a day, but I don't have a problem, And so that's what happens with racism. Same exact thing happens with racism. And what happens when you speak to a white person about racism is you're triggering their stress response. It's fight, flight, or paralysis. They either want to fight you and defend themselves and tell you how and why they're not a racist. They want to get away from you as quickly as they can. They want to fly the scene, right? Or they become paralyzed. You're talking, the body's there, but ain't nobody home because the spirit done left. They don't want to talk about it, like not talking about it, And so, so what we're looking at is a condition based on hundreds of years of conditioning. So we can't go blaming people and shaming people. That is not how you heal. You don't heal people by shaming them or blaming them. You help people heal by giving them information that can lead to their transformation, by being compassionate, by being loving. And I know that that's really hard for those of us who are people of color and who have to put up with a lot of stuff from people who act like teenagers in the family. You know what I'm saying? Like, or the infants in the family who think that it's okay to live, in a patriarchal system that treats you like you're a child. Like, this is so not okay for the spiritual community. I don't care what everybody else does, because we're here for them, right? But we have a responsibility. We've been given a lot of information and a lot of responsibility, and we need to take that seriously. It isn't just about love and light, it's about doing the work of the stuff that's happening on this planet right now, of taking care of each other and loving each other. And I don't mean loving each other and ignoring the painful pieces. It's loving each other and embracing those painful pieces so we can transmute that energy from pain to love. I really believe that's why we're here.
Yeah. It is harder, I guess, as an Asian woman at this point in my journey to I have compassion, but I think my patience level is at its all-time low because, as a white-bodied person, our white folks who are listening, you have so much information at your fingertips. There's books about this. There's people like you available, TED Talks, and I believe that is why we do the spiritual work. That's why we meditate. That's why we heal, is to lean into the discomfort. And for me, at this point, it's a choice to be in denial. It's a choice to spiritually bypass. So, and you said before that you're not judgmental. I am, okay?
I'm not as judgmental as I used to be.
Oh, okay. I'm still working on that. That's my honest truth. But for the white folks listening, what work do you call them to do? What work can they do at this point?
Yeah, so becoming race literate is number one. In fact, when I do this work in corporations, the first program that I do now since last year, now that they're actually opening up the doors and want to have a conversation about this, is race literacy. And race literacy is the awareness of the history of race, how we are acculturated into a racial caste system, and how that system affects everything from supermarkets to who gets to shop for what, and right down to education. It affects every level of our lives. So my first suggestion to them would be to become race literate. There are a lot of really great books that they can start with. Find teachers that you can work with. I would also say, be conscious. There are different things that people do, like there's anti-racism work, which is really good work, but it's different from healing racism work. Healing racism work is new to most people. I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know anybody else who's doing healing racism work other than myself, and I've been doing it for 35 years. But healing racism is about how do we create a sacred healing balm, where anti-racism is more about the systems and the institutional stuff and how it affects us. So with healing, it's about knowing and understanding the institutional, the systemic, and looking at the internalized. That's where we break, right? Like anti-racism is about the first two. Healing racism is about 5. Okay, so healing racism is about looking at the institutional, the systemic, the internalized. So we internalize the environment that we live in. That's why I tell you, this is not anybody's fault, right? Personal, because what happens is you internalize it, it becomes personal. By the time the 3-year-old knows who's good and who's bad, now their personality is telling them, are you in the good camp or the bad camp? You know what I mean? So that then becomes personal. And then children start to act out of that, right? And the interpersonal is how we interact with one another. So it's institutional, systemic, internalized, personal, and interpersonal. And so becoming race literate allows the spiritual community and all communities to really understand what it is that we're really dealing with. Where did it come from? How did it get here? Why is it still affecting us? How is it affecting us? All of those kinds of things. Because if you're a healer and you're really, really doing the work, you're going to get people who do not look like you coming to you for a healing session. And if you don't understand that if you're a white person and you're getting in a person of color, that they're carrying intergenerational and historical trauma that they may not even be aware of, that you as a healer need to understand and be aware of, you're not serving them at the level that you could, because you're not helping them clear those patterns, because you don't even understand them. You don't even know why they're there. In fact, you're not even looking for them because you don't think they exist. And so at that level, how helpful can you really be?
It's just surface level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like get your crystals and your candles and let's take a bath.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, now what? I'm drying myself. Now what? I still have to deal with the pain and and so, we can serve people so much better when we understand where they're coming from. It isn't just this, I think that the reason they call a lot of the work that a lot of us do woo-woo is because it's not grounded. It's not grounded in the 3D reality that we live in. Somebody comes to you because they're hurting over something, and it could be that there's childhood trauma that was an awakening to the intergenerational trauma that their grandmother suffered. And so does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's helping you can become so much more effective with people if you understand them.
Wow. Milagros, I can speak to you all day. I have 8 million questions.
I was just going to say, I have to go.
Yes.
I have another interview that I have to do in a few minutes, and I have to go get ready for that.
Thank you
that,
so much for being here.
oh my gosh, I've loved our conversation. And, thank you so very, very much. I would ask if people would support this work by my books, following me on Instagram, going to my website, which is milagrosphillips.com, and learning more about the work that's being done there, and then joining us in, I do a lunch and learn program. I've cut it, it used to be once a week, now I've cut it back to once a month because I'm so busy, but it's at 12 noon, so it's during your lunch hour. And we always discuss something interesting and something powerful. It could be something that's going on, or just a general conversation, or something that I'm teaching about. And so I would invite people to join that, and come to the 2-day. I mean, it is life transforming. You'll understand your own family and yourself so much better after those 2 days. People say that all the time, all the time. So it can be very powerful.
I
Thank you.
can't wait. I'm going to find a way to be there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Milagros, and thank you for your wisdom and your
Laura.
time.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany. It's been
Thank
wonderful
you.
being with both of you.